Alright guys, so I told you that I'd do a video on Nitro Nation, kind of show you guys some of the setups and the builds. See, a lot of people, they don't take the time to fine tune, and that's why they don't get the wins that they're supposed to get. They leave a general setup and they just expect to be able to modify the car and with modifications beat all their opponents, and you've got to tweak each different setup of race. And I'll give you an example of why my wins to my losses, why it's so dramatic and why there's very few losses. I'll give you an example on that. Now, I can understand, like, when you're first getting started in the game, you might want to buy some gold to tweak your first car, so you don't have take forever to get started on the first bracket. Now, my first car was actually this one. I'll show you. Was this one. And as you can see, it's a 998. Now, the highest I've ever seen for a modification level on this, on any class of car, the highest I've seen is 1010 modification level. This is a 998. Now, to show you the upgrades, basically it's all as good as I've been able to find. I mean, I know I could probably get a few more points out of it, maybe 12 more points of modification, but it's not really going to make it that much faster. I haven't gotten into the drifting end of it. I haven't tried that out yet, believe it or not, and I've been playing the game for like a year. But most of these parts, I mean, yeah, I bought some gold so that I could buy parts before they disappeared off the marketplace. But for the most part, I would grind on underground races, which is a good way to make gold. And in a day, I would make probably, like on this one here, I would make about 120 to 200 gold a day, just in wins, off of your blue tier, your gold tier, and the ultimate parts that you can win out of this underground tournament. Because you can turn a tournament in like 8 minutes. I mean, you can blaze through, and you can walk with about 3 gold per tournament. So, if you're blazing through every 8 minutes and getting 3 to 6 gold per tournament, it doesn't take you long to make quite a bit of gold that you would have had to pay like $10, $20 a day for. So, I'll give you an example of where I tune for the particular type of race. Now, what I've noticed with Nitro Nation is that, let me give you an example. The one that I tweaked the most to make it good enough is one of the cheapest cars in the game, and that's this one. And it's not even modified as much as that other car that I just showcased. The upgrades, most of them are the best. There are a few, like here and here, where I need to find better parts, but for the most part, it's going to be maxed out at like 998. But in order to keep up with the faster cars that they offer on Nitro Nation, that you can upgrade to, I will tune it depending on the type of race I'm running. Now, for the live races, what you want to do is you want to go into your garage, and you either have an 1/8 of a mile, a 1/4 of a mile, a 1/2 mile, or a 1 mile. Okay? So the way that you want to tune that car, the easiest way to dial it in is you want to go to your garage you want to go on upgrade, okay? And you want to go to tune, and what you want to do, leave these alone. Leave the first, second, third, fourth, fifth alone. Don't even touch them, because from the factory, they're gapped where they need to be. If you want to mess with whether you want acceleration or top end, always do your final drive ratio and leave these alone, otherwise you're going to mess up the way the car runs the best. Now, others might disagree with this, but I found this to be the best way. Now, like with your engine speed limiter, I've set that to where basically I can go over red line and hold it for up to like 3 seconds without blowing my engine. If you tune too high, try to raise that too high, you're going to blow your engine every time. It's just gonna happen when you top the car out. So you tweak this a little bit over, and then if you want to adjust for a long race or a short race, in live races you don't have to do that. What you want to do is you want to set up your final drive ratio, and the way you know where to set that is when you go into tune, go to test drive, and go to the 1 mile track. What you want is that car to be completely at red line, just hitting red line when you cross the finish line in a 1 mile. That means that the car is dialed in exactly where it needs to be. Now, that will set you up for your live races. So whenever you want to check to see if your car is dialed in for the live races, always run a mile and look for that red line at the finish. You don't want to be topped out before the finish, and you don't want to have gear left before the finish, because that means you geared too tall. Now, that does not apply, and you probably figured this out, that does not apply when you're doing underground, which is where you're going to make all your gold. Guaranteed. You're going to make all your gold here. You'll get a few cards out of the live races, but I can make more gold in the underground in a half hour than you will off of a day of doing live races. Now on underground, it's different. What you want to do is, if you're running a 1/4 mile, you want to gear just a little bit lower than what you had it tuned for live race for that mile run. So like, I'll give you an example. If I'm running a half mile or a 1/4 in underground, I'm going to want to go back, and I'm going to want to go to the garage, and where you adjust the gearing, I want to click on that final drive ratio, and I want to drop it about, and you're going to have to play with it. I go about, for live race, I'll run up to 238 for the neon. And for underground, that's what it's set for now. I want to drop that to almost, to where at red line you're at 235. You wouldn't think that 3 to 4 miles an hour is really gonna matter much, but trust me, in that 1/4 mile and that half mile in underground, you need a little bit lower gearing, because you're never gonna go, to top end. So you want to have it geared a little lower, so that when you start off the line, you're putting more torque and you're taking off faster. You don't care about top end at that point, because you're never going to reach it anyway. It's about grab and staying ahead until that up to the half mile is done, depending on whether it's doing the 1/4 or the half. Now, you don't want to lower this too much, because then you're shifting too much in the race and you're losing time that way. I'll give you an example. So like when I tune it in for underground, if I were to run it right now in live race like this with my underground setup, which is where it is right now, let me show you where it's going to redline in that setup mile. So I'll go to test drive, I'll go to the 1 mile, and of course that's my ghost. You're not running in the underground, you don't want to keep that setup where you've dialed it down 8 to 10 miles an hour, because you're literally going to screw yourself on the live race, because since it cycles from an eighth of a mile to a quarter to a half to a mile every, like what, it's like 5 or 8 to 10 minutes, you're only going to be able to run three of those races, the eighth of the mile, the quarter of the mile, and the half mile. And if it jumps to the mile, you're going to lose every time, I guarantee it. But like, I'll show you the tune that you're supposed to do for the live race. And that would be, so I will go in and I'll adjust the gearing just like I showed you. I'm going to bring that up to right about 240, 241. We'll try that. Let's see how good my memory is. And then we'll do another test drive of that mile run for live race. So now let's see if I can. See the difference? And that was just a few miles out. Big difference. That's still too low gear. And then dial it up about 3 miles an hour. So we'll go back into tune. And we'll dial it up a little bit more. Let's try that. And I'll show you exactly where you want it for that live race. And then I'll prove to you that's working. That is perfect. Perfect. Couldn't be dialed in better. So, we'll go into live race and I'll show you that tuning for that mile, no matter what race you run in live race, will win most of the time. So now we'll go into the live race and I'll show you where I'm at on that right now. I have not competed at all in this season. Now watch. I'm a little rusty, so cut me a little slack. That, I believe, was a half mile. I'll have to look. I wasn't paying attention. And I'll do it a few times. Now look at this guy. He's a 997. I'm a 991. He should smoke me. He should smoke me. And he loses every time. He lost miserably. And he's more modified than I am. That shouldn't be. That can only mean one thing. His gearing is off. And I've literally been racing against this guy for a long time. And he always loses. And you would think that he'd think, hey man, maybe I should mess with my gearing. But he's, like I said, most racers, they're going off of the modifications and the horsepower. They're not looking at gearing. And if your gearing isn't right, it doesn't matter if you've got a beat on parts and modifications. You're not going to win. It's not. Look at that. I don't even have to try. They lose every time. And I've actually run a 7.79. I'd have to look. But a 7.9 isn't a bad score for me. I've done better. But like, I can understand the ones that don't have the parts that you do, but when they've got you in modification and they're actually higher than you are, you know it's gearing. It has to be gearing. Now watch this. Everybody gets me off the line because the gear's too low. But by the time I grab third, you're done. You're not going to catch me. Look at that. I mean and I don't know if like they're trying to modify like each individual gear, like I told you don't want to touch, or if they are trying to tune their final gearing, but they're definitely geared way too tall, way too tall. And with that neon, I've actually placed in the top 10 of the live races, like here I'll show you. In the brackets, I have been in the top 10 racers of the game with that crappy Dodge Neon. A 991 Dodge Neon. A 4-cylinder car. That just shouldn't be. Now, like I said, it is kind of a pain in the butt when you have to tune a little bit lower to make your gold on underground. You know, because of course you can't keep as tall of a gear ratio because you're never going to run a mile race in here. The most you're going to run is a half mile. So you have to gear it down a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to be too tall and you're going to lose probably 80% of the time. It doesn't matter if you do a perfect start or not. It's not going to happen. You'll get them like right when you start out, and by the time you shift out of first, they're gone. But I'll prove to you that the modified gearing works and how well it works on here. When you go into underground, so now I'll go to my garage and I'll tweak that gearing a little bit. Now, I'll guess here, because I don't want to make the video too long, but I'll bring it down to about 239, 238. We'll save that. Let's try that out. So, what you want to do is, I'll only run one race because I don't want the video to be too long. So I'll go into underground now that I've adjusted the gearing. And we'll do, the neon is kind of anemic when you get out of third gear, so we'll do quarter miles. Like I said, I'll only do a couple races because I don't want to take too long. But let's go with a 416 with 2 cheats activated. And I won't run any cheats on this. that's a crappy time. I can do a 7.8 in the underground. So an 8.1 is almost like, yeah, I should be ashamed of that. But I've learned where the cutoff is. So like for modification level, you can't go by what you go by in live races. So like for V8s, I can take up to a 500 modification level for the AMC, a Pontiac probably a 600, a Lotus probably 700, and you got to kind of memorize this so you kind of know when you're getting in over your head. But let me know what you guys think of the video. If you want me to showcase anything else on any of the different cars or any of the different classes of cars, let me know, and I'll show you kind of the setups on those and what modifications to get first. I'll talk to you guys later. It's been great talking to you, and let me know what you think in the comments.